Well, I hate to stop the fellowship. In fact, I always dislike stopping fellowship. Oh. So we're streaming, and so I look to see how many people are watching. And there's one person watching. It's me. Yeah, thank you. I'm watching me. Hello, me. So we're going to be in Genesis 28 today, looking at another one of Jacob's dreams. And this may be one that I hope gets some discussion, because this is one of those where I've always assumed and thought it was longer and had more like content to it. But then when you actually go through it and read it, at least for me personally, it was like, that's it? This huge dream that I thought was out there. And I'm, of course, not being critical with the Bible or any of those things. It was just something I thought was much, much bigger than it is. So we're going to look at essentially Jacob's ladder and the dream that he has of the ladder going up to heaven, or the sky, as some people put it, and what comes out of that, and then subsequent ones out of that with Laban, and etc. So in Genesis 28, and beginning in verse 12, actually verse 10, I had to put my eyeballs on. Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. And when he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and he lay down to sleep. Now, to step out of this a little bit, for those of you who have not been in here, we're studying dreams and visions and seeing not only where they are, but what they teach, some of the things that can come out of them. And we looked at Joseph, and I don't know, spent a couple weeks on him. We spent a few weeks on Gideon and the dream that was there for with the military guy. And so today, looking at Jacob's dream at Bethel. So verse 12. I feel like I'm yelling. Am I yelling? Is it really loud, or is it okay? Okay. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth, with the top reaching to heaven. Another possible term for that is just into the sky, as opposed to what we view as heaven. And the angels of God. And guess what the word there for angel is in the Hebrew? It's Malachi. It's literally the word Malachi. Because you remember when we were looking at angels and seraphim, the word angel in the Hebrew is Malachi. And yes, it's the same as the prophet Malachi. So the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And there above it stood the Lord. Jehovah. And he said, I am Jehovah, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. So where Jacob was lying, where he had the stone that he used as a pillow, your descendants will be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the east and west, to the north and south. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. I am with you, and I will watch over you wherever you go, and I will bring you back to this land. I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. And so when Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely Jehovah is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? There is none other than the house. This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. And so early the next morning, Jacob took the stone that he had placed under his head and set it as a pillar, poured oil on it, essentially anointing this place. And he called that place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. And then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I will return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God. And the stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house. And of all that he gives me, that you give me, I will give you a tenth. So this dream that Jacob has as he falls to sleep, God utilizes this picture, this visual of this ladder or this stairway. And in the Hebrew, the word could be ladder, stairway. It's the same idea. That's literally resting on the earth, and yet the top of it reaches, again, the word heaven there could be heaven or it could be sky, which the same thing is the case in Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, or the sky and the dirt, the land. God makes the sky, God makes the land. And here it's the same word, the same idea. So it was reaching up to the sky, and the Malachi, the angels of God, are coming up and down this thing, and God is at the top. God is in the sky, standing above, and stood the Lord. Now, I know a number of you I've already shared this with, and I've talked about it in my lesson, but this word Lord seems to be Yahweh, the name of God, that was personal name of God, or rather the general name of God, with Adonai, the personal name of God, and then you tetragrammaton, I think that's the word, you put these two together and you get Jehovah, with Yahweh in Hebrew, because Hebrews don't have vowels, and then you put Adonai in there and you get Jehovah. Which, a little side note that I think is kind of funny, and yes, I'm fully aware I have a strange sense of humor, is Hebrew does not have, they don't have J's. Isn't that right, John? They don't have a J. So our word actually should be Jehovah. But who's going to say Jehovah? So we put a J there even though they don't have J's, and it's Jehovah. So that's typically that name in verse 15 and on. Then above it stood Jehovah, Yahweh, sovereign, and then Adonai is the personal name. I am Jehovah, the God of your father Abraham, God of Isaac. And so, I don't know, even within context, notice here, there's a dream that Jacob has, and God doesn't ask him to interpret it. He doesn't ask him to think through it. He specifically tells him what the dream is. The interpretation is right there for him to hear and to listen to. And I point that out because it's interesting, because with Joseph, Joseph seemed to have the interpretation. And in fact, his dad and brothers got upset at the automatic interpretation, or at least what they thought it meant. But then when you have the cupbearer and the baker, theirs needed interpretation from specifically Joseph. Pharaoh's needed interpretation from Joseph. But with this dream, God not only gives it to him, but in this dream, the angels coming up and down and Jehovah being at the top, the interpretation is where your body is, where this stone is, all of this land I'm going to give to you. And not only am I going to give it to you, but I'm going to be right there with you. I'm going to be in your grill till you die. For the rest of your life, I'm going to be with you. And as a result of that, Jacob names this place Bethel, which is God, the house of God. And I don't know if you've ever noticed this either. This was kind of, I put these dots together a few years ago. I don't know why it took me so long. But when you look at the word Bethel, it ends in El, like El Shaddai, or the other L's that we find in terms of God's name. So El is God, God's house, the house of God. And so this place where Jacob is where this house of God is going to be. And when Jacob woke up from this dream, he says to himself in verse 16, surely Yahweh is in this place. And then what's he say? I didn't know it. I wasn't aware of it. And then he was afraid. And this is kind of one of those asides, and for whatever reason, this is how I read Scripture often. I thought about all the places where people were afraid, and then they were calmed. God essentially says, do not be afraid. And these are just a couple. In Genesis 3:10, when Adam and Eve had eaten of the fruit, and then they hear God walking in the cool of the day, they were afraid, obviously because of the sin that they had done. And then in Genesis 15, Abraham is afraid of his situation, and then God tells him, you're going to have a child, and Abraham kind of freaked out, didn't believe that. And then in verse 6, Abraham believed, and it was accredited to him as righteousness. So anyway, I'm always curious whenever stuff like this comes up, other places where that shows up, and God's assurance to them, do not be afraid, I'm with you. I'm going to be with you. I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to do X, Y, and Z for you. So how awesome is this place? There's none other than the house. This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. So I don't know when the last time you read this was, but any thoughts? I didn't look up that word gate, which would be very curious to me what exactly that meant. And I say it's interesting because I've always heard of this in the sense of this sucker reached heaven. It's like, when Paul in 2 Corinthians, his vision took him to the third level of heaven, as he calls it. Did Jacob see heaven? Or did this thing just simply in his dream reach the sky, reach where, we place God's presence, God's existence, that kind of thing? And it seems as though, at least with the word, it's also the word sky. So it was in that area that this stairway went to. Why do you think use a, yeah, John? Why do you think use a stairway? Why use a ladder? Why go up to the sky?
We needed that Led Zeppelin song. If this wasn't in the Bible, we wouldn't have that Led Zeppelin song.
Just had to go there, didn't you? It's funny. I actually looked up, and I tried it in all different ways. You're right there with it, my cheer. Yeah. Gotta have that song. I looked up Stairway of Heaven. The ancient meanings, stairway. I looked up in all different ways. The first 8 results were What is behind the song Stairway to Heaven by, whatever?
I think one of the really just here, right? Heaven isn't a religious place in this time, in this context. The word is just the stuff beyond the sky.
Yeah.
Their model was the sky was the inside of like a bowl. There was a giant bowl over the world. The world's a plate. There's a bowl on top of it. That bowl is heaven. And the gods live on the other side of the bowl. Right?
Which is what they saw.
That's what they saw, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Really fascinating. They didn't have a word for blue in any of these ancient languages.
They have a word for what?
Blue. So they just
Oh,
described
blue.
it as bright. There's no blue.
Yeah.
The word blue doesn't appear in any of the Hebrew parts of the Old Testament.
Right.
So just this bright thing, this bright bowl up there, and on the other side of the bright bowl was where the gods were,
Right.
And then this passage is super interesting to me because it's like, oh, God is here in this place,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
He doesn't have the concept of God being everywhere.
Yeah.
It's not even part of his thinking about the world. Gods are local figures, local spheres of influence.
Yeah. And even if he did, it's still interesting that he would say, being afraid or maybe being more in tune, surely Jehovah is in this place, and I wasn't aware of it. And then he was afraid, maybe more in tune, and he said, how awesome is this place? Now, I'm going to be a little over detailed here. I know in our culture today, awesome is a highly overused word. I mean, we could say everything from, you did an awesome job painting that wall. The game was awesome. I met this person, they were awesome. We have all kinds of places we put that. I really doubt that that's what Jacob meant here. You know how amazing.
This is a fearful sight. Fear.
Yeah. Very, very reverential. And this is none other than the house of God. Again, the name Bethel, house of God, which is why he called it Bethel. This is the stairway. And I don't know why they use stairway up above and gate here, but this is, that place of heaven. So, be very honest with you, this thing has just quite honestly always confused me. Sorry.
Can you talk about a little bit about the angels descending and descending, and what's going on with that?
The only analogy, or I guess connection that I make, because we did like a whole series on angels, but it was more of specific places where they are. In Ephesians, it talks about that after Jesus, Ephesians 4, and the angels ascending and descending. And it was talking about Jesus' victory after the cross, his resurrection. He hands out rewards to his people, et cetera, et cetera. So ultimately, to answer your question, I don't know. Other than the heavenly realm where God is touching man, and God is touching man through his messengers, which is one of the things we came out with, at least I did, that the challenge with the term angels is it's a very loaded term. We have a lot of visuals we have of it. They're simply messengers. They send messages to the earth, to different people. They are God's messengers for a variety of reasons. So it may just be that God is in touch with, he was in touch with Abraham, in touch with Isaac, he's in touch with Jacob. And he's going to have that connection with Jacob, with his descendants, with those people, et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of where I am. And any other thoughts on that? What's happening here with the angels? Yeah, John.
So I think the gate stairway thing,
Yeah.
it brings to mind what a hill country fort would have looked like in Israel at this time, right? The hills and the Judean hills are in here. It's where they put their fortified villages. They have a stairway. They picked the steep ones because they were easy to fortify. And they have a gate at the top of the wall. It's like, oh, heaven's God's fort. Heaven's God's fortified village. the angels coming, those are his servants coming back and forth, all that
Right,
stuff.
right, right. So they would he actually gave him a visual of something he knows.
That's what I was like, when I hear like the stairway to gate in this time, and if you go, if you've been to Israel, you go to all the really ancient places in Israel, and they're all in that part of Israel, they're all on the hilltops. Like you go to the village of Megiddo or / Armageddon, what we call its actual place, right?
Right.
Armageddon. And it's a hill fort, and it's the oldest thing we know of in the region, on top of the hill. And Jerusalem, walking around Jerusalem, you're like, oh, they put it on this hill because attacking up this hill would be horrible.
Yeah.
Right? And they're all hills, all these towns.
Kind of makes you think about either San Francisco. I don't know how many of y'all have ever been to Tulsa, Oklahoma, but there's parts of Tulsa, Oklahoma that are very, there's parts of Tulsa that are very hilly. At least to me they were.
It's in Texas.
There's a whole lot of ways you could come out with that, but yes. So that actually, at least to me, makes a lot of sense that when we get to some of these places and they are not only new, but they are very unusual to us. We don't know what to put them next to. And then you hear the landscape and the general situation of those places. And that's why, to me, it's very important that I am in no way suggesting that you are going to start calling angels messengers as you read through the Bible. I know you're most likely not going to do that. But I think it really shifts our mind and it changes for us if you have a very influential man and a lot of his subjects are below him and they're going to serve him, then they're going to go up and down these stairs. He's going to send messages. They're going to take care. They're messengers. They're human messengers, like servants, and they are going to do that. So if that's the case, and God gives this message to Jacob, why is Jacob fearful, reverent, in awe? Why would he be that way in this situation? Because God is sending messengers to him. This is how I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to take care of you and your family. Anywhere you go, east or north or south, it's going to be yours. So the master is telling Jacob, this is how I'm going to serve you. This is how I'm going to take care of you. And so for Jacob to go, the master is going to take care of me. And he's sending his messengers, his servants, to share this with me. So why would he set up, this altar and actually call this place the house of God? This is where God gives him this message. This is where God is going to not only serve him, but serve his entire family. Notice verse 20 and 21. Jacob made a vow, if God will be with me. Anything about that that's curious to you? Because nowadays, in our current Christian setting, do you ever generally pray, God, if you're gonna be with me, God, if you're gonna take care of me, do you ever pray like that?
No, I thank him for doing all of those things for me.
Yes, we do. Right. And on that point, what does Jacob pray here? What's that? Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Sounds like a bargain. Okay, God, if you're going to do this, and you're going to bring about everything that you just said, if you're going to do this, and that's why I ask you, do you ever pray? God, you promised this, and if you do this, then I will. We don't pray that way. Now, granted, we're in a very different situation. We are post what? Resurrection. We are post promise. We have perfect 2020 vision about all of this stuff. If God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey that I'm taking and will give me food to eat and clothing to wear, if all of these things take place so that I return safely to my Father's household, how does he close it? Are any of y'all there? It's the last part of verse 21. If all these things happen, then what? I will follow him. No? Then
This stone I set up is a sacred stone, and I will give you a tenth of everything I have. The stone isn't even sacred unless God fills his.
But even before that, what does he say even before that? The very last, 6 words in verse 21. If you do all this, then the Lord will be my God. And John, I don't know if you know this or not, because I didn't look it up. That word there may be Elohim. and we've talked about this on Wednesday nights before. The term Elohim, which I just learned recently, is just small g God. And it had no innate meaning to it. It wasn't like, in the beginning, God created Elohim and all the things that I learned. It's just a general term for the gods. So if Jehovah God will do all this, then he will be my Elohim, my personal Elohim. So if this God, this Jehovah, is able to do all of this, he will be my Elohim. And the stone that I have set up as a pillar will be Elohim's house. And I will dedicate this place to him. And all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. See, I love Anna's response. If this isn't in the Bible and there's not a sacred sense to it, how do you read this? I mean, seriously, and you're not upset that God's going to get mad, or you're not being reverent, or you're not being fearful. How do you read this? If you do all of this, I will call this place Bethel, and I'll give you a tenth of everything. Are we good? Do what?
And it really disappointed God that they could still kind of have this kind of back and forth because man had not proven our foolishness.
See, I think that's such a great question, because we find a lot of places where God not only allows but even entertains. You find it with Moses. You find it, we just went through Gideon. You find it with Gideon. Look, you call me great warrior, but if that's the case, let me offer sacrifices to you. Let's do this fleece thing. Well, I want you to go out and tear down your father's altars. Okay, but I'm going to do it at night. Otherwise, I'll die. God says, okay, that works. Now, we don't have that conversation, but obviously that worked for him. So if you do all these things, not only are you my Elohim, and I will commit to you as Elohim, but I'm also going to give you a tenth of everything that I have. I'm hopeful that one of the things that this may teach us is that not only was this a different setting and a different people and a different time, they thought very, very different than we do today. And a little tiny example of that, and I'm not overly proud of this, but as many of you know, I grew up in Houston, and not like the outskirts of Houston, but right there in Houston. And my first couple of preaching places were small towns, like under 8,000 people, and a lot of them were farming towns. Man, you talk about being out of my element. And these people were strange to me. They weren't strange. They were strange to me. And I was strange to them, because the way that I talked and what my customs and setting were was 5-lane highways and traffic and lots of busyness. And top speed in these towns was like 35 miles an hour. Just blew my mind. What's that? I didn't get any. I mean, they were just small towns. They were farmers, which I very much appreciated. I just didn't get, and they really didn't get me either. So whenever we go back into these situations, very different mindset, very different settings. So in other words, Jacob doesn't necessarily have the same idea of God that we do today. And there may be a lot of assumptions and even, prejudice and judgments that we may have that aren't necessarily fair because of where he's coming from. Now, a possible response to that is, yeah, but his daddy was Abraham, or granddad was Abraham, and his daddy was Isaac. And, they definitely had their struggles as well with the things that they went through. So that's the Jacob's ladder. That's the dream that he had, and that's the outcome of that. Any other thoughts? And hopefully some of the other thoughts, thing you're going to say is going to bother me. I love discussion. It really is fun for me.
If we took the word if and put in, as long as you're going to do that for me, I will do this for you.
Yeah.
Would that be
Yeah.
it? Or is that changing it?
No, I think, however you state it, it's still kind of this contract. It's still contingent on, but again, to your question, I don't know if he was saying, look, if you'll do this, I'll give you a tenth. If this doesn't happen, you're not getting jack from me. I don't think it was that kind of an attitude. It was very transactional, which oftentimes, we're possibly in those situations. So in no way am I saying that Jacob here is being snarky, that he's being conditional, that he is, in any way dishonoring God. I'm saying it's a very different way of thinking, that you give me this and you'll get a tenth, you will be my God, et cetera, et cetera. And we also have to understand, Jacob coming out of the womb was called the deceiver. And we find him, doing things in his life where he was a deceiver. That's why they named him that, or heel grabber. John, did you have something?
I just think it's one of the many times, like Genesis makes a whole older parts of the Old Testament make way more sense when you're like, oh, these people didn't see God the way we see God.
The way we see God.
Right? And even the guys writing Genesis, I think they don't see God the way that Isaac and Abraham, they realize that there's a difference between how those guys see God.
Yeah.
And so one of the stories that's happening across Genesis, Exodus, etc., is the Israelites figuring out who God is.
Yeah.
And Isaac's got this very primitive, God is the God of this place, this hill, on this spot, right? And I can do deals with him, and I can negotiate with him, and it's not anything like the God you see in the later parts of the Old Testament that's portrayed as like omnipotent and everywhere and capable of doing anything. It's just not how the patriarchs saw God. And the Bible is very clear on that.
Yeah.
They didn't know God like that.
Right.
They thought there were many gods, right?
They thought there were like lots of gods, so this was one of them.
So then he may be in a state of almost a revelation, like this may be a real God, a real deal, and so I will make you mine out of reverence, in a sense. But still trying to figure out, almost if Eli came to me and said, I'll let you be my dad because he sees that this dad thing is good.
That's a comic book.
Okay, but
Really not wanting you to finish your point.
But it's funny that, it's not funny, but as patient as God is, it's like, you don't make a deal, Eli wouldn't make a deal with me being his dad, because no matter what you do, I am his dad.
Right.
And I'm the only dad.
Right.
Well,
but to your point, I think that's why, and maybe I'm not stating it as clearly as I am in my head, that when Jacob says, if you do all this, then as Jehovah, you will be my Elohim. I will pick you, and you will pick me, and of all the available gods, you will be my God, and I'll trust you. And on top of that, the little cherry on top, I'll give you 10%. How about that? So as we think about this stuff, I encourage you not necessarily to, I know we're done. It's very hard for us as Westerners and as Americans, and especially at this time, to dip our hand into this world and see things as they did, because they didn't view God like we do, almost at all. All right, thank you for your comment. We'll continue with Jacob and Laban and some other